much. Good afternoon, everyone. It's Monique Calisti. I'm the president of the Digital for Planet Association, and it's my pleasure to welcome you all to this webinar this afternoon. We will spend a couple of hours together speaking with prominent experts in the area of digital communication networks. In particular, we will look at aspects related to sustainability, moving towards zero pollution communication networks. This event is part of the European Green Week that, as you might know, is ongoing. A lot of very important and relevant events for this community. What I wanted to give you a little bit an overview of is Digital for Planet. That is the association, the nonprofit association that has been organizing this event. Now, why green digital? Well, I guess that especially during these pandemic times, we have realized how much our lives depend on digital technologies, digital solutions that are key not only to access to essential services, but that can also be used in order to have a more efficient use of resources, to optimize processes across a number of vertical domains and applications, and that are also of great help in monitoring the environment and thereby taking actions to optimize consumption, energy consumption and impact on the planet. Obviously, we also know that, however, digital technologies are also part and a big part, unfortunately, of the problem. What do I mean? Well, the first thing is that clearly technology is driving electricity demands. The estimates that I'm sure that you have seen maybe also different kinds of number, but there are several reports showing that the ICT could consume 20% of the global electricity by 2025, generating 5.5 of CO2 emissions worldwide, with 25, I heard even 50 billion connected things by 2021, which is clearly a huge impact on the environment. Then just from a hardware point of view, to build up our devices, we need to extract rare minerals. And oftentimes this production, not only the deployment of the devices, has a huge impact. And also the fact that too quickly and too rapidly, we tend to replace devices. And in fact, the production of electronic waste has been increasing dramatically over the last couple of years. There is also a cultural trend that is induced by technology. That is a negative trend, in my opinion, and that is the fact that technology is oftentimes, even by design, inducing overconsumption. We have this tendency to replace rather than repair, and sometimes software developments versus hardware forces hardware upgrades. And this doesn't cost, this has a big cost for our environment. Now, it's clear, therefore, that we need to find the proper balance between the support and need and help that that digital technologies can provide to humans beings, that can give for a quick restart of our economy and society. On the other hand, we need to be able to answer to the environmental challenges that we are called to face. This is the spirit with which Digital for Planet was born. The ambition for this nonprofit association is really to support the development and adoption of green digital technologies and solutions for the sustainable development of our economy and society. We're an open network, open to individuals and also to organizations, public, private, and the aim is to facilitate collaboration and also promote awareness about green digital initiatives. There are more and more of these initiatives, and we are very glad to be one of those forces. But we also try to gather experts, and this is one of this webinar today is one of the concrete examples. Gather knowledge, gather tools that can be shared in an open and easily accessible way for especially smaller players that might not have the means to turn their business into a more green digital business. And last but not least, there is a big need to support initiatives in this direction concretely via resources, via public and private funding. And we're doing that, helping researchers and innovators to identify among the several options, what can be the best opportunities for them to find their research and innovation activities. Now, without going too much into detail, what I would like to say is that, of course, you might all be very familiar with the European Green Deal and with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Well, what we aim to do is clearly align with these initiatives, with the ambition of these two initiatives. But we want to have a more direct approach and concrete and pragmatic way of unleashing the power of greener digital technologies. So we really try to foster collaboration with partners that are active in the ICT field, but that are also keen on liaising with partners from other strategic sectors in order to achieve this global end-to-end green sustainization or greenization of the value chains that we have in place. So making them greener. Now we have to organize activities because we want to be very pragmatic and concrete. We started with putting together 4 working groups that are active in the areas that are more closely related to our experience, our connection, our contacts, but this is by no means an exhaustive list. And we had already webinars with 3 of them. One was focused on cloud edge IoT computing. The other one was focused on climate neutral and sustainable smart cities. Then we had the last one in April about sustainable next generation internet. And today we're here to focus more on communication networks. Now, I will give a few minutes, if you allow me, introduction about some of the green opportunities in Europe, to then pass the floor to our keynote speaker. So there's luckily a lot of opportunities popping up, and in particular within the context of the European Green Deal. As you know, there's a plan to mobilize at least 1 trillion euros of sustainable investment by 2030. They will be allocated in different ways, not only direct grants, but also investment plans and public procurement and different kind of let's say, instruments. And the idea is really also to trigger a whole ecosystem of innovators to invest more in terms of resources and in terms also of efforts into realizing this vision. That is no net emissions of greenhouses by 2050, economic growth that is decoupled from resource consumption. We want to grow, but this doesn't mean that we want to consume more. I think this is very important. You might have heard a lot about the degrowth approach. And last but not least, not leaving anyone behind and no place behind. And today we're going to talk about something that is very important. Besides our keynote speaker, I guess we will animate some discussion about the fact that communication networks are acting as a key backbone for connectivity in our society, which means providing access, providing digital rights to citizens that could otherwise not have access to a lot of vital services. But in order to do that, we cannot forget that there is a very strong impact on the environment. So I think it's really time to get to this destination by ensuring acts and activities and actions at several levels. So the European Green Deal is acting at, industrial level, research and innovation level, with a number of calls that are planned within the various clusters of Horizon Europe, but also rolling up new and healthier and cleaner forms of transport. Decarbonizing the energy sector, ensuring that buildings are more energy efficient, because in buildings we typically consume a lot of energy. And of course, this cannot be done by Europe alone. There must be a global approach to environmental challenges. And there's also a number of policy, political, legislative activities that we might discuss more in details later on. So the European Green Deal revolves around some key areas that are, scattered in these boxes around this center. And there's been a first wave of calls that ended in January. Now the notification for the selected projects have been submitted last week. And these projects should start after the summer. Now, there will be new calls. As you know, there was a delay in Horizon Europe, but the latest news are that they should be open on the 22nd of June. And there's going to be several calls from several clusters. Let me enter into this picture now. So here you see the Horizon Europe broad high-level organization, and you can see at the center the global challenges and industrial competitiveness frame, in which you can find different clusters. And in particular, here there are clusters that are of direct relevance to greening communication networks and on the impact that green communication networks can have on other sectors. In particular, I mentioned three: culture, creativity, and inclusive society. Then we have digital industry and space, but we also have climate, energy, and mobility. Then there's also missions that are of relevance, that like the climate neutral and smart cities and the adaptation to climate change, including societal transformation, in which clearly investments for greener communication networks are core to realize the vision and the ambition also not only of the EU Green Deal, but of Horizon Europe and of the digital decade vision. Here, I just wanted to give you a flavor. Today, we won't have time to go too much into details, but I wanted to give you a flavor of the calls. There's several in 2021 in cluster 4, that is the ICT cluster, that call for, of course, more agile, more powerful, more reliable, more resilient, but most of all also more energy saving networks. So saving energy, it's one of the key factors across a number of calls. And this is where I think the ICT community should really gather and engage in achieving that at all different levels of the network stack. Now, we will come back possibly to some of these aspects throughout the discussion that we will have with the panelists. Now it is my pleasure to give the floor, and so I will stop sharing my screen. Do that quickly. Voila. So I leave the floor to our keynote speaker that is my pleasure to welcome here today with us. It's Mrs. Arti Holla. She's the Secretary General at EMEA Satellite Operators Association, and the pleasure now is to leave her the floor for the next presentation. Thank you.
Monique, thank you so much. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Perfect. So it's my pleasure to be here, and Monique, I really thank you for inviting ISOA and the satellite operator community to be part of your event. Just to introduce ISOA, we are the EMEA Satellite Operators Association. As you said, we represent 22 satellite operators, and between them, they operate in GEO, MEO, and LEO orbits. Some of them are global operators, as you may know, like SES, Intelsat, Inmarsat, Viasat, and others are regional players. But the difference between ISOA and other satellite associations is the fact that we are driven by the chief executive officers of all of our members. So coming to this, this subject, zero pollution is, of course, one of the global challenges facing our planet. And I know that the role of satellite imagery and navigation are both well understood, whether it's for monitoring large-scale changes to the planet, or whether it's to contribute to transport efficiency and so on. But the role of satellite communications is a lot less well known. And so I hope to elaborate that and the contribution that we make in this presentation. Let's start with a quick look at the technology itself. So I'm not about to say that satellite is the greenest technology at all, but it is worth noting some interesting facts and metrics around it. To start with, one satellite transmits to Earth for 15 to 20 years, and it does so using solar power for all of its power needs. The service footprint of one satellite is massive. If I reduce it to just to the EU, then I could say that one satellite can provide 150 high-definition TV channels across the whole of the EU, and in doing so, release 0 carbon emissions at all. When you consider all of the broadcast satellites in orbit today, they in fact use less energy than one terrestrial TV mast. And I know that the launcher is often something that comes to people's minds when we think of emissions. And here I contacted Arianespace, who's one of our members, and I wanted to give you some metrics from them. So one Ariane launch corresponds to one Paris-New York round-trip flight with around 230 persons. In other words, it's about 0.000025% of annual EU transport emissions. And you can translate that into 1 year's launches, basically being greener than one evening's transatlantic flights. So maybe that gives a little bit of context to how the technology and the launching of satellites impacts this topic that we're discussing. But if we now turn to the current challenges, we know that communications technologies are increasingly being called upon to help, and climate change is one of them. Satellite communications technologies have certain characteristics, which means that they can support climate change related activities in unique ways. We all know that they extend the reach of communication technologies into rural areas, but what is particularly important and relevant to this topic is that they extend the reach of those technologies also globally, particularly into the oceans and into the skies. Our world is seeing huge increases in global production and trade. IoT applications are becoming increasingly relevant because they can help companies increase their productivity while ensuring that those increased productivity activities don't in fact compromise our shared environment, for example, through carbon emissions. There are 3 important sectors across which SATCOMs are enabling industrial Internet of Things applications. They are energy, agriculture, and transportation, all of which are directly related to global production and trade, and which are directly concerned by environmental considerations. The growing realization of how satellite communications can support industrial IoT has resulted in the emergence of a wave of new applications for satellite systems, and even investment into dedicated IoT satellites from existing and new satellite operators. There are 4 key enabling features that satellite communications brings to the industrial IoT environment. The first is the ability to provide automated and resilient instant information solutions. This is particularly relevant where it's difficult to deploy actual people to go and check on pipelines, to check on networks which have been deployed and so on. Secondly, by using satellite communications, you actually have a complete, low power, cost-effective, and easy to install solution. And this is a solution which it can be in response to small, medium, or even large scale threats and risks. So you could be talking about the increase of a water level for a lake in the middle of Africa, like Lake Chad, or you could be talking about the threat being posed by a tsunami, you know. With satellite, you have guaranteed data delivery for any number of users. And this is thanks to handshake protocols between satellite messaging terminals and monitoring terminals. And you also have path diversity, which brings redundancy and resilience to networks. So here I'm talking about ensuring the continuity and backup of existing networks, terrestrial networks, by making sure that you have satellite as a backup for them. It's never good to rely totally on one type of network. So let's take a closer look at energy. Now, the energy sector has long been criticized for its use of fossil fuels, and satellite-enabled industrial IoT apps are helping this sector meet increasing demands to reduce the reliance on non-renewable energy. Energy providers are operating huge networks of pipelines. Often they carry gas or other fuel. And these providers, these pipelines can and do suffer accidents. But by using a network of sensors along their networks, energy providers can gather data to monitor the integrity of their networks and deploy a rapid response in case there's a leak. And that leak, for example, could result in increased carbon emissions or otherwise harmful content into the environment. The data from these sensors can be efficiently collected and shared using satellite communications. If energy companies had to deploy manpower to actually locate and assess and then respond to a leak somewhere along this pipeline, you can just imagine how time and resource intensive that would be, but also imagine that it could potentially result in a far greater loss and environmental or pollution damage than if you can remote control it 24/7 using IoT applications. The next subject is, of course, global transportation. Now, whether we're talking about supporting travel of people or trade of goods, the global transportation sector is, despite the pandemic, foreseen to grow enormously in years to come. And with that growth, of course, comes increased carbon emissions. The International Transport Forum predicts that CO2 emissions from transport might increase by 60% by 2050. And we know that transport happens everywhere, on the air, in the air, on the sea, and on the road. It could be caused by faulty equipment, engine damage, or poor route planning. But diagnostic sensors, smart telematics, etc., can collect and share engine status data via satellite, and that can be used to notify fleet managers of any anomalies that are happening to help limit CO2 emissions and even extend the lifespan of vehicles, which in turn reduces emissions. If we take a look at aviation for a second, the ecological improvements of using satellite communications can really be dramatic. One of my members in Marsat estimates that a reduction of more than 20 million tons of CO2 per year can be achieved for the aviation industry alone using satellite-based IoT solutions. If we come to farming and agriculture, IoT sensors here can provide carbon dioxide monitoring, which is directly relevant to certain agricultural activities like burning. So burning is a common practice, which I didn't know until I was preparing for this event, actually. It's actually used by farmers in so many parts of the world because it's a fast and economical way to clear stubble and clear weeds and waste before they sow a new crop. So even though it's very efficient for them, it's actually highly unsustainable because it produces huge amounts of black carbon, which is a major pollutant. But by putting sensors in areas where burning is known to occur, helps authorities enforce compliance because it shows which farming organizations are playing by the rules and which ones are not. I also included on this slide a couple of heat maps which are taken from satellite imagery because, as I said, satellite imagery and the role that that plays in monitoring emissions and the impact on the environment is really well known. But maybe what I shared with you now about using IoT sensors supported by satellite communications, those kind of applications are far less well known. Of course, we need to talk about communication networks and 5G. So one of the ambitions of 5G, one of the policy objectives that has been stated is that it should reduce power consumption. And here I think we have to talk about the lead mass market application, which is enhanced mobile broadband, EMBB. Now we know when we look at the data that most of the traffic, the data traffic which is consumed with EMBB is in fact driven by media and entertainment, or in other words, by OTT and gaming. And both of those involve huge amounts of data processing and energy consumption by data centers. 5G calls for MEC servers close to network edges. Now, they should really be used for storing popular content. And while satellite might not reduce the need for data centers per se, a satellite overlay can certainly help to pre-position popular content closer to users and so reduce the overall burden on the network. And I think because we don't know the amount of infrastructure which is really going to be required to upgrade existing networks and to roll out 5G everywhere, we do need to look for these kind of efficiencies wherever we can find them in the network in order to optimize the performance and optimize the energy consumption and burden on the network overall. I also included an image here of a base station which is backhauled by satellite. This is an image which comes from BT. And this is important because satellite backhaul can help extend the reach of 5G networks while minimizing the overall energy consumption. What I mean by that is you can go to a greenfield area where today you may not have even 4G connectivity, and you could put up one base station. It could be enabling 4G, it could be enabling 5G, but you could backhaul it by satellite. And that means avoiding digging up the ground all the way to that rural or isolated area, but bringing relatively immediate connectivity to that area. My last slide is about ubiquitous connectivity. I think we all saw with the pandemic how the environment has benefited. The majority of the population, almost in every country, has stayed at home or worked from home or followed school from home. And this has reduced congestion, and congestion is a major polluter, a major negative impact onto the environment. But in order to seize some of those benefits and draw them out into the longer term, we need to make sure that people in all communities, even the remote communities on islands, on mountains, and so on, have access to connectivity. Satellite broadband can extend the reach of that internet connectivity, enabling in the European Union today up to 50 megabit per second with a minimal environmental impact and energy consumption. So that's the end of my presentation, Monique. Thank you, and I hope that was interesting for everybody.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Arti. I've been taking notes, and I'm glad that we are recording because your presentation was full of dense of data and details that we for sure need to dig more into the details. I would like to open the floor for questions in case participants would like to drop their question on the chat, because we have the opportunity to ask more directly about specific points that have been touched today. First, I don't see her. I would like also to ask my speakers in case they have questions now. I would have one, but I first wanted to give Giovanni, please go ahead. You're on mute.
Yeah, thank you, Monique. Yeah, it's a very interesting overview that you gave of the satellite industry. And I wanted to ask you one thing that connects to what Monique presented at the beginning. Now, she said basically technology, ICT as a whole, has two major aspects of emissions and environmental impact. One is the operational usage of energy and so on, and the other one is the full life cycle cost of building, operating, and dismissing. So how would you position the satellite industries and technologies in this second part? Because, for example, I'm not a specialist, but I think I know that there are some different semiconductor electronic components. So is it better or worse than regular consumer electronics? And then also, of course, the end of life problem that you say they are up in the sky. How do we get them back? Can we recycle anything in satellite? So this was my question.
Thank you. Giovanni, you have asked such an interesting question. I wish I could answer it, but unfortunately I'm not from the manufacturing sector. I did in my questions to Ariane, they did give me data on the full life cycle of the launcher, and that they have taken so many steps in terms on different aspects, on the in-flight phase, on the manufacturing phase, on the facilities used and the equipments that are being used, all the way to the fuel which is being used. And that also is relevant to the fuel which is being used on board the satellites, right? So we're also being put under pressure to make the satellites in space, even though they are solar operated, solar powered, we're still conscious of trying to move move more towards away from mechanical and towards software defined and this kind of thing, which is less fuel intensive and hopefully more efficient as well. Of course, the impact is not felt on Earth in that sense, but for our sector, it's not just about preserving the environment on Earth, it's absolutely about preserving the space environment as well. So space traffic management is something that we take very seriously. We are constantly working at a policy level to ensure that norms and best practices are adopted and possibly even taken up into regulation going forward. For example, the geo operators, typically all of them carry sufficient fuel to make sure that those satellites are carried into a so-called graveyard orbit after their use, so that there is no danger of them providing a collision risk or falling back to Earth. And, you know, a lot of satellites, they are in the lower orbit. Some of them do fall back and they burn up. Most of that is environmentally neutral. However, there is obviously some debris that may fall back into the oceans and so on. I'm afraid I don't have more insight into the manufacturing process to give you a better answer than that, Giovanni.
It was very interesting, thanks. Also because you pointed out that it's not only the payload that I was thinking of, but there is also all the launch and all the infrastructure that must also be accounted in this end-to-end impact calculation.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. I have a question that is more about what do you see as being the main challenges, research directions that the community, the SATCOM community is looking at? What are the main priorities in terms of vision and roadmap?
In terms of green, you mean?
Yes, in terms of green.
So I mentioned one, which is the space traffic management, but when it comes to use on Earth, you know, we have been relatively shy as an industry to play the green card, even though it's true when it comes to extending the reach of 5G, when it comes to connecting people, you really don't need to dig the environment. You don't need to dig up the landscape. You can achieve so much leveraging the signals which basically shine onto the whole of the globe. We are still relatively shy in leveraging those arguments more. Maybe we should do more of that. But what we are conscious of doing is making sure that the efficiency that satellite networks bring into hybrid systems for 5G. So what can you gain from integrating satellite terrestrial solutions? We are very keen on pushing that, calling for more research into that. For example, what I mentioned about data centers, I think this is probably a really valid point, but in the whole ambitious 5G objectives, even though power consumption is one of them and energy, you know, consumption, all of that is one of them, I don't think links have necessarily been made all the way into what are the gains to be had from integrating networks. And I think that the data center point and the satellite overlay point really highlights that, and is something that needs to be digged deeper into and researched.
Thank you very much. A lot of food for thoughts and food for actions. I don't see other questions in the chat, so my audience is pretty shy today. But we will have more opportunities to discuss also, and I would like to invite you artists to stay with us if it's possible now in the next discussion. Passing the floor to the other invited experts, starting from Monique. So Monique, the floor is yours. I know you have a presentation, so you can share your screen with us.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. So I'll go ahead and share screen now. Let me do that here. Because somebody is actually here. All right. First and foremost, I want to thank you, Dr. Monique Callisti, for inviting me to represent Cineverse to this wonderful discussion. This is extremely important to us as a company and also to Digital for Planet. We're going to, my intervention here is to take it from a company of culture, even though we are quite involved as a company in these very, very important topics around communications, zero pollution networking, infrastructure, and so on. But it all commences with a company, if you will, of culture. And that's where the angle of my narrative, the narrative on behalf of Cineverse, I am taking here. And it really is important to us as a company. Some of the data that I will be citing, we will be updating this data, but you can see that it is critical for us to actually set the tone for what it means to have a green culture especially specific to infrastructure, because we do see this as very core, if you will, to our business practices. In 2019, and again, as I said before, we will be updating our data, but we had our goals set, for example, of metric tons of CO2 per full-time employee to be set at less than, let's say, 10, and we were around 2.9. And it's really important for us because we started to track our carbon emissions in 2010, and we are, as we stated before, we're improving, and we will again show that we are continuing to improve in this particular area, which is extremely important for us, once again, as a company. In terms of emission grams of carbon CO2 by revenue, we saw it and still consider that our goal should be less than 31. We achieved 23. Again, it's around below the 31 grams of carbon dioxide equivalent per unit of revenue is very critical to us. We want to probably think about how we can even improve upon that stated goal. But again, we see, and the point here from a culture of where we are at as a company, we see that we're on the right trajectory. It makes very much sense to us as a company. In terms of where we are, and if you take it from the North America perspective, we do purchase or have purchased renewable energy credits, and that is to be able to offset our carbon emissions, especially when we're talking about the electricity sector. So, this is to become more green certified. You can see that here, as far as 2019 is concerned, we had to purchase this total of 1,943 megawatts of renewable energy credits in 2019. So it's again emphasizing, if you will, amplifying, if you will, what we mean to be a green company that has infrastructure that is quite involved in some of the topics that have been previously brought out, especially if we're talking about 5G and so on. But we do see, for example, in terms of the energy efficiencies here, our buildings. I think, Monique, you brought out what is important in terms of the buildings themselves. We have installed highly efficient, if you will, fixtures and lamps, specifically around how we track occupancy through sensors. We see, to reduce this constant light on, constant light off. This is, low-hanging fruit, if you will, that we need to think about as a company. And we've been doing that. And when we're talking about, heating, ventilation, air conditioning systems, we have also looked at how we can improve, if you will, the code featuring what we call the whole area around seasonal energy efficiency rating, especially if we're talking about company cars. Because if you're in traffic, that rating, you increase that rating, if you will. So this is very important in terms of what you produce through a quote unquote corporate car. By footprint, and here we have cited 1,351 carbon tons of or metric tons of carbon dioxide, which is the equivalent of greenhouse gases. And as a community, we're very active. This is extremely important for the employees and for our Cineverse family on the impacts of what we do. in terms of green community, green company, culturally, business wide. And so we have offices that are globally. We have offices in not only our headquarters is based in the United States, but we are in Luxembourg, we are in the UK, we're in India and China and other parts of the world. And so we do help provide safe, because water management is very key to this discussion, drinking facilities to underprivileged schools. And we also support educational programs and plant trees to preserve. And planting of the trees is very important. You know, it's an emotional engagement, if you will, to our Centerverse family. And in terms of providing those green spaces that we need to appreciate more because they're so precious to us. In terms of recycling, we're very, very, very bold on recycling. We believe that in recycling, it should be no-brainer for us. It is a no-brainer for us. You know, we have, for example, recycled 285,000 at least in 2019, and even more so, over pounds of paper, and that is the equivalent. And that's important when you put it as the equivalent of what it means in terms of trees. It's 2,936 trees or 428 cubic yards of trash. It's making this topic so concrete for us as a company. We even have shred day for the employees. Right. So I think what we want to do is we want to be able to move to circularity at the end of the day, and that is important as a culture for us. So you can see the direction we've been taking as a company, which of course we will be updating our data as produced from 2019, but we're also looking at moving to circularity also as a business. Because we can see it this way, you know, if you kind of do a correlation, if you will, technology, which is pre-industrial revolution, you know, you sort of had that limited transformation. But if you take it a step with industry plus energy plus networking plus compute, and this is where we, you know, when we're talking about zero carbon, if you will, computing, you know, this gets into an earlier question that was posed, you know, in terms of what's happening in that semiconductor space becomes interesting. But of course, the interconnection of things around circularity is a hugely important topic, because this is where we have things connected to things connected to things. So critical for us. So, you know, it is that correlation from energy, greenhouse gas, the carbon cycle. And again, we see that correlation from the circular economy to cyclical resource management. And we're very proud to be involved, not only involved, but it just makes business sense. It makes sense to our employees. And thank you very much.
Thank you, Monique. Thank you. I would like to first continue with, is there any specific question now to Monique, because she might leave? I think important the message that, you know, also at business level, small to big organization can have a huge positive impact by adopting policies and behaviors that can be, of course, making the difference for employees, but also for the environment in which we live in. And now I would like to give the floor to Jim Morris, that is our next speakers. And Jim, if you can also shortly introduce yourself, that would be great.
Yes, thank you. Hopefully you can hear me and you can see my screen.
Yes, we can. Perfectly.
All right. Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you for the interesting presentation so far. I've just got a very short few slides to provide some input and some food for thought for this panel that's coming up. Firstly, about me and about my company. So I'm Jim Morris. I'm on the right, founding part of Transformer Insights. Transformer Insights is a firm of industry analysts focusing on the digital transformation space. So we look at all forms of emerging technologies like IoT and hyperconnectivity and new forms of connectivity and human machine interface and artificial intelligence and distributed ledger and so on and so forth. Basically seeking to analyze the new technologies, the use cases they're enabling, and what enterprises and businesses can do with these things, these two groups, as highlighted on that picture. So enough of the background. One of the pieces of work that we did recently was looking at the impact of new and emerging technologies, the technologies from the previous slide, on sustainability. What I've called out here is impact on energy consumption, and that's both electricity and fuel, so hydrocarbon fuel, which we've converted to petawatt hours as well. And looking at the electricity saved, fuel saved, you can see that these are very significant numbers. Actually, more fuel is saved than electricity is saved. And what's causing this? Many of the applications that Artie was talking about earlier, just making operations more efficient, making business operations more efficient, and avoiding costs of sending out vans to service things or engineers to service things because you know the status of them because they're connected to Internet of Things connections. So just highlighting a few of the key numbers from here. So significant sustainability benefits from IoT and enhanced IoT. That's kind of IoT plus AI really. So total energy savings of about 5 petawatt hours in about 2030. Net electricity is 1.6 petawatt hours and hydrocarbon fuel savings of 3.4 petawatt hours. So quite significant savings. Offset against this is some electricity which is consumed, very much outweighed by the electricity saved, and of course there's a vanishingly small amount of fuel used, or hydrocarbon fuel used, to deliver these new emerging technologies. So overall, a very beneficial picture, apart of course from blockchain. I'm sure many people are aware of blockchain, but the power consumption of blockchain is off the scale. If you look at it on a per transaction basis, it really is very, very resource intensive. Not on this slide are savings from CO2 and also water consumption is reduced by 230 billion cubic meters a year in 2030 by new technology applications, most of which actually are IoT and also combined with AI in the agricultural space. So things like treating crops with drones as opposed to spraying a whole field and applying precision agriculture techniques. So very beneficial overall. All IoT applications, of course, and IoT is the vast amount of the benefit here. All IoT applications are dependent on communication networks. I think that's a key point. So if we spin around and we look at sustainability from the perspective of a communications network, there are many things that can be done. So there's the Next Generation Mobile Networks, or NGMN program or initiative, and effectively that focuses on powering down aspects of mobile networks when demand allows. So falling back to coverage as opposed to providing capacity when demand is low. You can implement AI to increase the efficiency of data center cooling. So data centers have come up today already, but Google implemented AI in its data centers, and they reduced power consumption by about 40% just by better managing the cooling based on data center load and the weather, frankly, and the environment. So not particularly sophisticated, but a huge saving there. You can implement power efficient and data traffic efficient connected devices and applications, and that's a good thing. That reduces the load on the network. You can implement edge computing and AI to redact traffic, so analyzing video feeds out at the edge using edge processing and only sending information into the core networks, and actually utilizing communications networks when there actually is something to report or something abnormal has happened as identified by an AI algorithm. So you get a lot of efficiencies that way. You can locate servers where green power is available, because of course consuming electricity in a server farm which is located in a country which generates power from burning fossil fuels is a very different proposition to having a data center in a country which has almost completely green and pollution-free electricity sources. And it almost doesn't matter how much electricity you consume, as long as it's all renewably generated. There's also an aspect of consumer choice. So those consumers are watching 8K Ultra HD quality services on demand. Potentially not doing that would significantly reduce the loads on a communication network. And of course, there's a lot of slightly flippant comment here, but there's a lot of things like just cat videos on the internet, and that just drives usage, just drives traffic across the network, frankly, for little gain. So there's a lot of things that can be done. But it's important to note there are some things that should not be done. And this again harks back to some of the things that Artie was mentioning earlier, and the efficiency which can be driven by communications. So for instance, you could reduce communications traffic by not implementing edge-based or MEC technology, vehicle traffic management solutions. But of course, as a result of that, you might have more vehicle traffic in city centers. Which of course is a net loss. Potentially you could travel to business meetings instead of using web conferencing. Well, that would reduce communications traffic. It's clearly very adverse effect from a sustainability perspective. And something like implementing smart building management and HVAC solutions. You could just not do that and not invest in that technology, but the result would be far more polluting buildings and far less efficient buildings. So I think the key point that I wanted to make was that aiming for zero pollution communications networks is a good thing, but that goal needs to be analyzed in context. And quite often the context is that the communications can enable far wider savings, which far outweigh the cost of the communication networks. And it's about getting that balance right, particularly at the micro level. And at that point, I will hand over to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Jim. Again, quite some interesting insights from you on a number of crucial choices to be made, indeed. And now, before then starting a Q&A session with all of you, I would like to give the floor to Professor Alessandro Vanelli Coralli from University of Bologna, that will talk about a viewpoint from the SATCOM community. Please, Alessandro, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you very much, Monique, and good afternoon to everyone. I'm trying to share my, let's see, my screen. Hope you can see my screen right now, or not. Let's try again.
We can see now.
Okay, thanks a lot. Okay, so good afternoon, everyone. As Monique introduced, my name is Alessandro Vanelli Coralli. I'm a professor at the University of Bologna. And for the last 20 plus years, I've been working in satellite communication from the technical algorithm perspective. What I want to actually touch today is the role of non-terrestrial network in 5G, 6G from the perspective of the environmental impact. So essentially, what we have seen till now is that 5G and 6G can have an environmental impact that is an indirect effect, an enabling effect, as can be called, through what is enabled for other industry to achieve the environmental goals that we have heard about that in the previous presentation. There's also another effect, which is actually the direct effect of having a greener 5G, 6G ecosystem through two main directions. One is the infrastructure optimization, and the other one is the resource optimization, or the resource management optimization for energy efficiency traffic delivery. So in this perspective, I'm trying to focus on the second point, so the direct effect. And in particular, I'm asking which is the role of NTN in this context. So the 5G, 6G vision is actually a quite complex architecture. We can say that it's a unified terrestrial and non-terrestrial architecture, where the NTN, the non-terrestrial component, actually consists of a multi-layer infrastructure, where multi-layer means that we will have different nodes, if you can call satellite if you want, but there will be also other type of nodes like UAV and that, so drones, unmanned vehicles, and so on, flying at different altitudes, so different orbits in different constellations. And these nodes will be actually interconnected to one each other through internode links between nodes of at the same altitude, but also nodes at different altitude. let's take, for example, a low Earth orbit satellite communicating with a geostationary satellite from 500 to 36,000 kilometers of altitude. So this is actually this consistent. This actually create a lot of flexibility in the infrastructure. And what we are seeing is that we will face a flexible and reconfigurable topology that will actually be able to provide a system optimization according to the traffic that needs to be served. We have heard RT before saying that we can serve broadband, broadcasting, or IoT in a rural area, but also on the ocean and so on. So this means that you have to reconfigure your infrastructure. And this is something that is very peculiar of the satellite, of the non-terrestrial environment, since these nodes are moving one each other. So they are actually connecting one each other in different ways and differently through the day, through the weeks. So we have essentially a network that can be configured in different topology according to the needs. And this is one aspect. The other aspect is essentially that thanks to this reconfigurability, the traffic delivery in the unified integrated architecture can be optimized according to the requirements and can be optimized along several directions. Can be actually the capacity, the coverage, but also the cost, the energy and the environmental impact and so on. Essentially, we have heard that we can use broadcasting through satellite because it's very efficient, but also broadband in unserved area. You do not have to dig to reach the base station in unserved area through backhauling, but you don't even need to have base station on that point because 5G and 6G actually forces direct access to the terminal and so on. So this is actually the vision, and actually is where we are going. Yesterday, a prime manufacturer in Europe actually presented in a workshop a plan, a roadmap for the development of the architecture, and the development of architecture was exactly a multi-layered one with the inter-nodes link. So it's something that is happening. In this context, also coming back to Giovanni's question, the key point here is, which is the impact in terms of environmental aspects of the satellite infrastructure. So the direct impact in terms of essentially what we can say greenhouse gas emissions. So there's no studies, as far as I know, yet available on the non-terrestrial network for life cycle assessment. But there was a couple of studies back in 2016 related to hybrid high throughput satellite system. It was an FP7 project called BATS. And from that one, it sends a couple of ETSI technical report dealing with a hybrid high throughput satellite, which means a single satellite in not just in a geostationary position. So in this case, the key findings of the study are were of particular interest. First of all, the total yearly greenhouse gas emission for the entire system has been found comparable with what is foreseen for a 5G or 4G medium national infrastructure, even lower than what can be seen, for example, for Switzerland in the University of Zurich and the EMPA study that actually placed the GHG emission for a 5G network in 2013, the order of 80 kilotons, whereas for a satellite system, for the satellite system, and on a yearly basis, we have something like 10 kilotons of CO2 per year. But the key point here is that only 3.4% of the greenhouse gases emission on the entire life cycle of the satellite pertains to the production, about 2.9% of the GHG emission, to the launch, and this is what Giovanni was asking before, 0.56% of the entire life, and the end of life treatment, so the disposal of the satellite in the graveyard orbits, or for the smaller one burning in the atmosphere, is actually sum up to 0.04% of the total GHG. which actually leave us with the question that the 96.6% of GHG emission are actually due to the operational phase. So essentially the use of the satellite. And of this 96.6%, 92% of the GHG emission is actually due to the energy consumption of the satellite and user model. When we say satellite, we say both the flying modem, but also the ground station modem. And this is actually a very interesting aspect, because if we say that 96.6% of the GHG emission are related to the modem, then we know on which aspect we need to work in order to reduce the direct impact of the NTN infrastructure. So just to complete, and the conclusion is that we know that NTN will play a fundamental role in reducing the environmental impact for 5G and 6G through infrastructure optimization, traffic delivery optimization, and synergy with the terrestrial component. Will have a limited direct impact of the NTN, mainly due to traditional contribution. And we know that to improve the direct and indirect impact, studies are needed to reduce the modem energy consumption. And this actually brings us to softwarization, virtualization, and disaggregation of the NTN access network. Numbers for softwarization, virtualization, and disaggregation of 4G base station in indoor application tells us that thanks to softwarization, we can reduce the energy consumption for a 4G base station for indoor coverage of 90%. For a macro environment with a single operator, we can go down to 40–50%, which is actually a huge gain in terms of energy saving. So softwarization, virtualization, disaggregation are three directions that NTN shall actually follow in order to reduce the environmental impact. Another aspect, which again have been touched yesterday in a workshop organized by the European Commission on SATCOM, is the production of ultra low power component. Essentially, we need to move from dedicated components, as it is right now for the satellite, to general purpose component on which softwarization and virtualization can be run, but these components shall be actually ultra low power. And in this perspective, Europe is a little bit behind, is lagging behind the development on the development that is actually related to this component in the US, for example, but we are catching up, and the new component devices are actually being developed in this direction. And finally, last but not least, is the evaluation of the life cycle assessment of NTN based not only on a single satellite, but on multiple constellations. We know that mega constellation of very low Earth orbit satellite or low Earth orbit satellite are very trendy. So we need to assess the impact on that case. In that case, the satellite is much smaller than the GEO. So the cost of the satellite in terms of energy will be actually much smaller. The launch, we need more than one launch to complete the constellation, but for each launch, we can actually deploy hundreds of satellites. So there's an entire subject to be studied in order to assess the NTN impact also in view of the 6G integration. And that actually completes what I want to say. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alessandro. Thank you very much for a very interesting perspective on the concrete direct and indirect gains that are expected from integration of SATCOM with terrestrial networks. I think here it's very much an area in which Europe will invest more. I think this relates also to, this presentation relates also to some of the aspects that Arti touched in her keynote speech in the opening. I think definitely Europe is well positioned to play a major role, but as you say, it has to catch up in a number of directions. Now, since we still have time, we will have time also with a question from the audience, but what I would like, I see that there's questions about Alessandro sharing his slides. I will ask all the speakers if it's possible to then share the slides that they have presented with the big audience. They will be put online on the web pages of Digital for Planet. Thanks, Alessandro. Now I will ask Fabio Cartolano from Fit Consulting to take the floor. Fabio, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Hello. Good afternoon, and thanks, Monique, for inviting me to this very interesting webinar. So I will talk about transportation and logistics. I'm working in Fit Consulting, which is a consultancy company dealing with this sector. So we do consultancy services and research in transport and mobility. So we are trying also to spot the future trends of this domain. Let me start the presentation with the fourth industrial revolution. So I copied here some words about what will be Industry 4.0. And what highlighted me in seeing these sentences from the World Economic Forum chairman is that the basically only metric in considering the innovation is a metric related to cost, to money, let's say. While we know from the pictures below that there are several other metrics related to pollution, to social equality, to safety that has to be taken into account. So we know already now that there are some innovation in transport and logistics, from the e-commerce to the sharing mobility, etc. But they are some impacts that sometimes are not very well perceived by the large audience. You see in the first picture an example that I recently discovered that most of the truck drivers are kind of homeless because they live in the truck. So basically the picture that you see is the normal life of one man bringing freights to our home. So this is something that hits probably our minds in considering which are the impact of this revolution that we are in. And as most of us know, there are several institutional meetings trying to deal with climate changes brought by this revolution. You know that Conference of Parties started since early 19, and there were several meetings, basically once a year. I just reported here some of them, try to challenge this, to deal with these challenges. You can see that I put a brief list with Paris agreements, Kyoto Protocol, etc., in let's say reverse mode. The reason is that I recently discovered that the first Conference of Parties is considered to be the one, the COP1 with the Berlin mandate in 1995. But if we start to rewind the tape a little bit, we know that there was another global urban planning conference in 1898. And the problem was similar regarding pollution in cities, because at that time there were a lot of omnibus, the tramway, horse-powered, in major cities, in London, in New York, in American cities, etc. And the main problem was that all of these horses were filling the roads with droppings, basically. This was a big problem, seriously, because it was a healthy problem in having the road covered in droppings and also for flies. And then this conference was closed earlier than expected, because basically all the institutions were not able to find a solution at that time. So there was a frustrating situation because there were no solution in this. The solution was found some years later by Henry Ford with the introduction, the mass introduction of the automobile. So this is probably surprising. The solution was for pollution in cities was the automobile, that was considered as the revolution because of its sustainability and ability to reduce traffic, as you can see here in the copied sentence from newspaper at that time. So what we can learn from this this consideration in the past, that problems depends of our perception. Sometimes yesterday solution, can become today's problems, like the automobile. We now know that the traffic is one of the major threats in our cities because of pollution, because of safety, but also the social inclusion and all of the related impact. Why this? Because probably if we think to this kind of problem like traffic and logistics, which has a very massive impact in our lives, only from, let's say, the very technical point of view, the optimization, the strict optimization has some limitation that can be overcome basically by innovation. And sometimes solutions can become new problems. I was thinking, example, to some enthusiastic statements about the driverless car, considered to reduce traffic of something like 60% in cities. These again are some enthusiastic statements that probably do not consider the potential induced demand of this. I also saw that Monique in this initial speech talked about inducing overconsumption. Well, basically this is something similar. When we will have a driverless car, which will be a very nice revolution for sure, we will have more demand because our time driving will be productive time, because we will not drive. So there will be more people driving because we can have fun while we are in the car. We can work. Also, elderly people can use the car because there will be no limitation. So the demand will grow up, and this is a side effect very relevant that some of institutions are starting to considering. So what I want to say in this, that sustainability is not just a list of KPI, but it's also about other broader aspects such as social equality. And we have to take into account this when we talk about innovation, about technologies. We have to consider a larger set of aspects in this. And how to respond to new challenges. I saw also that from previous speakers, we talked about several innovation, especially in the technology part. And these innovation in the mobility sector are bringing several new solutions, like drones for last mile delivery, like electric cars that are expected to remove the CO2 from our urban areas, or maybe to replace it from other places where the energy will be produced. E-commerce, that we know it's a major introduction in our lives that has bringing more congestion in cities, and the already mentioned driverless car. So my statement is that here, besides technologies and solutions, we have to take into account to some models, and probably the combination of all of these three aspects can be the winning innovation to responding for challenges in transport and in logistics. We know, an example, that mobility as a service is considered one of the new waves, still with some major problem to be resolved, but is the way to consume the mobility as packages that can be subscribed, and the mobility as a service operator is the one that can combine all the multimodal offer in order to provide the most efficient solution for the citizens. Similarly, the physical internet is another innovation in freight and logistics. It is the web of logistics. So basically, the idea to move physical objects and to have an interconnected network of logistics operator nodes and all the related subjects in this sector, acting like the digital internet. These are just two examples of great challenges that we can deal with technologies and solutions, but of course, in order to have the real sustainable innovation here, it's a matter to try to combine these aspects together in public and private governance model, where all the subjects can bring all together their interest and try to find, let's say, combined and balanced solution for this problem. Only technology-driven solution probably cannot work, or at least can work in the near future, but can bring further problems that are not very well known at the moment. And that's it for my speech. Just want to remind, in line with this aspect of sustainability, that today is the World Bicycle Day. something that probably is interesting because, again, the bicycle is growing up in our cities, very interesting, but still probably the technological aspect is not enough considered in this part of the domain of the mobility, and probably we have to consider more because there is plenty of opportunity in try to find new solution for mobility from the, let's say, structural point of view, so manufacturing, but also from the energetical aspects and the model of mobility, especially for our cities. And that's it for my speak. If you have any question, I'm here.
Thank you, Fabio. Actually, again, another very insightful and inspiring presentation. We don't have further presentations from our speakers. Can you stop sharing the video so we can, now I will ask the speakers to switch on their video. And of course, I would kindly ask the participants if they have specific questions, but also the speakers, if they have questions for the others, to please not be shy. Alessandro, we still don't see you. Now we see you. Okay, we have Giovanni that will follow afterwards. Monique had to leave in the meantime. So I think what's emerged clearly from the discussions today is that there are several aspects that need to be addressed, several different levels. First of all, there is a policy-related level. There is regulations. There are business aspects, market-related dependencies to be addressed. Besides, of course, technological research, scientific challenges. So the full picture needs a lot of pieces to be put together so that we can really achieve a zero pollution communication networks view. And today, by coincidence, we heard more on, by coincidence, because we had also invited a couple of other speakers that could not make it. We have heard more about satellite communication as an important trend for enabling greening the whole communication backbone for our society and economy. And here I would like to ask one question that is about integration of satellite with terrestrial technologies. I think there's going to be huge challenges because still there's a lot of work to be done. And my question is whether you, Arti, for instance, you believe that in this integration, it's all about this integration, the effective gain and positive impact that we can get out of SATCOM integration.
Yes, definitely. So there is a lot of work going on in terms of for satellite integration into 5G and beyond. 3GPP is the organization where the standards for 5G are being set. And right now, in coming towards the conclusion of release 17, we actually have 3 work items which will somehow benefit this. One is on 5G new radio to support non-terrestrial networks, which is about the direct access, which Alessandro was talking about. So the ability to literally have different devices talking directly to the satellite, but also talking to terrestrial networks, which obviously, if you can achieve that, you really prevent the need for having to roll out terrestrial infrastructure absolutely everywhere. Then we have NB-IoT to support satellite. There's a lot, as you saw from my presentation, there's a lot which is already happening in the industrial IoT space, but by having standards in this field, that will really help unlock potential new really important markets, one of them being global asset tracking, for example. So that's all to do with the global trade and production that I talked about, which is a huge amount. I think everybody knows how polluting maritime transport can be. The last bit which is being worked on is backhaul, 5G backhaul with using satellite communications, standardization for that, and that will, obviously, when that comes in, we're talking about economies of scale, and again, not having to dig up the ground to extend the reach of 5G.
Thank you very much. Alessandro, would you like to complement or add anything to this? Because I think it's directly related to what you have been presenting.
Thank you, Monica. Well, Arti actually presented the situation on 3GPP. Maybe I just want to add just a bit related to the fact that there's also the ground segment where virtualization and disaggregation actually will play a role in the integration, because as soon as you can actually share part of the radio access network with the terrestrial, you actually enter in clearly in the economy of scale, but you actually enter in a way in which you actually can save the cost in terms of energy cost, because you actually bring to the very last the bit before choosing to go on the satellite or on a remote antenna. So essentially, there is also work that has to be done at the ground segment in order to integrate the NTN component with the terrestrial one, and that will actually allow this optimization of the traffic delivery that will save a lot of energy. I mean, there's no need to go through hundreds of base stations when you can just use one antenna on the satellite to do broadband or to transmit the control signals of the network itself.
Thank you, Alessandro. Now, let me jump to something that was mentioned by Fabio and that I believe, or that was more part of his presentation. We've been talking now about the regulatory, the integration, standardization, technological side, but what about at the end of the day, user engagement? Because, you know, also reminding us that today is the bicycle, it's the World Day dedicated to bicycle. In a way, we remind ourselves that ultimately it's about how humans use technology that will make a difference. So how do you see the engagement of users into also the development and definition of technologies that are more environmental friendly, Fabio?
Well, actually, at the moment, we don't have such a nice situation, because basically in the recent development, I think, an example to e-commerce, most of the innovation were technology driven. Well, I'm not against technology, of course, but just to say that sometimes we have some induced behavior which is not so sustainable. So we say, okay, today is the Bicycle World Day, but at the end, all of us has Amazon Prime, which lot of caprice logistics, they say, some of the induced behavior that has very bad impact in the environment. What I want to say is that sometimes the regulations try to seek to follow the technology innovation, but it's quite difficult because there is no unified regulatory framework. So every big corporate try to put in the market some innovation. It is difficult for states to try to stop or to limit some side effect in this. The citizens sometimes usually follow the innovation because it's something that is more convenient for individual lives, and the approach to collective impact is very low at the moment. Probably we can add also that social network does not help in this. Well, don't want to say that it's pessimistic vision, because probably we have plenty of innovation that can help in this, but maybe we should use technologies. I'm thinking an example to ethic artificial intelligence or things like this, to try to challenge these new problems, also from a social equality point of view. That's because, let's say, KPIs are not only, let's say, the measurable ones related to CO2 or to safety impact, etc. But there are also some intangible metrics that should be taken into account because they have quite a large impact in our lives as well.
Well, basically, there is a lack of transparency and there's very little regulation on how software or technologies are built, essentially, right? So That's also why citizens sometimes are perfectly ignorant about what it's their digital footprint. I think this is very much one of the points that we try to do to work on with Digital for Planet, to really make organization, even public and private SMEs, small business entities, from small to big ones, that in fact technology doesn't cost at zero cost for the environment, besides the cost that it has on our resources. This relates me. This helped me to relate to what Jim has presented. So Jim has presented in his first slide a quite optimistic view on emerging technologies, saying that globally they are helping to actually protect our environment. So globally they have a positive impact on the environment. How do you think this is going to be possible with this acceleration that we had on our society about use and deployment of digital technologies that oftentimes they do not have any form of control, any form of certification on their actually CO2 footprint?
It's a good question. So firstly, the analysis that we put together was based on forecasts of adoption through to 2030. So the assumed increases in volumes are taken into account. It's worth highlighting, though, and this has been a consistent, kind of repeating theme through this afternoon, is how communications enable savings in a wider economy. So, for instance, a fleet management solution, if you're managing a fleet more efficiently and you're directing that fleet more efficiently, is using less fuel, etc., creating less traffic. So there are knock-on benefits. And really, what you've got with new technologies, you've got four phases. You've got a phase where you're building it, then a phase where you're distributing it, and a phase where you're using it, and then there's an end of life phase. And it's that operational phase where you may generate benefits. And there's quite a clear distinction, actually, in two different markets there, between a consumer market and an enterprise market. In an enterprise market, businesses tend to invest in solutions that enable more efficient operations or enable them to do things at lower cost, essentially because they're saving something somewhere else. For instance, an AI bot in a call center means you don't need as many call center people, which means you don't need the building to be as big, and you don't have those people commuting to work. That's the enterprise side. Consumer side is quite different, and this picks up on some of the things that Fabio is mentioning, because there isn't that feedback loop there. And on the consumer side, things like connected AV systems, they can use an awful lot of traffic. If you compare watching a 4K HD video which is broadcast via satellite versus one which is on demand, and you have 1 million people watching that, the power consumption via satellite will be minuscule compared to the power of the terrestrial networks, and consumers have no visibility of that. My personal view on this is that the solution to it is to track things back to source, back to raw materials, and to figure out what the carbon footprint is, what the whatever footprint you want to track is, and administer that, and actually render that as a tax to the end user. Because at that point, the end user realizes that if he watches the 8K video on demand, it comes with one price, and if he caches it onto his hard drive as it's broadcast over satellite, it comes with another price. And how would you enable that? Well, it comes back to technology again. One of the things I said in my presentation was that blockchain was off the scale in terms of power consumption for what it delivers, but that's blockchain, the cryptocurrency. If you take a wider interpretation of distributed ledger, so distributed ledgers is a superset of blockchain, and you can have private and public distributed ledgers, and you can have permissioned and permissionless, and blockchain is a permissionless public distributed ledger. If you look at the other side of that matrix, at the private permissioned version, what you do get is you get really quite an efficient way of abstracting information over very fragmented systems. and it's ideally suited for tracking supply chains and implementing auditability across very fragmented supply chains where you don't have a level of systems integration that you might ideally want. So you can track raw materials right back to source. As an additional benefit, once you've done that, you can actually check that those raw materials were sourced in appropriate ways. So not causing pollution, not using child labor, not from conflict zones, etc. And this is equivalent of farm to fork type theories, but applied across many supply chains. And if you can actually do that, you can figure out what the carbon footprint is, or what any other form of sustainability footprint is for the things that people are consuming. And at that point, they're informed. I'd probably go a step further and say maybe we should put a tax on it.
I think you touched very key essential aspects, that is what kind of incentives can we create at socioeconomic level, political level as well, to ensure that there is transparency, that there is a way to certify and, well, first of all, measure and thereby certify, the kind of footprint that our digital behaviors can have on the environment in different situations, of course. But what I think it's key, and now I would like to close the panel because I would like also to give the floor to Giovanni for his speech. What I think it's key, and what we have touched upon thanks to your interventions, is the fact that no doubt our society needs connectivity, needs improved digital connectivity. And in order to make sure that the all citizens, that no one is left behind, as in the ambition of the European Commission, it's becoming true. Not only we need quite some work at technological level, and there are many promising directions that we have identified thanks to the presentation of Arti and Alessandro. But there is also a lot of work that needs to be done at the level of software design, hardware design as well, and at the level of regulations. I think what we can definitely say is that towards to go into towards a zero pollution communication network, we need all the components, including the humans that are part of this system, more and more as an integrated piece of the communication network, to interact in a new and more conscious way. So devices can be made more energy conscious. We know that there are quite a few applications that allow to better control devices. Devices are becoming more efficient in energy consumption, but it's not only about energy consumption. There's a huge chapter about natural resources consumption, and about a culture of overconsumption that needs to be somehow mitigated. Having said that, I would ask in one final sentence from all the expert speakers on wrapping up what we said today and their call to action. Starting from Arti, then Alessandro, then Jim, and finally Fabio. To then give the floor.
This is one of those occasions where ladies first is not a great thing. I think as a call to action, I think we should not assume that there is one right answer when it comes to future communications networks. And because there is so much competition, if you will, both nationally, regionally, and globally to be the first to launch 5G and so on, I think there is not enough time taken to consider the kind of important questions that have been raised in today's discussion. And I think that's a shame, because people are, if you have good quality connectivity, good quality 4G, actually most citizens are very happy with that. It's when the reliability is not there, the stability of the network, the quality is not there, that's when they're not happy. People are not waiting desperately for 5G. So a little bit more research into the optimization of the networks and tapping efficiencies, especially to make them less energy intensive and more efficient, is definitely worthwhile. So that would be my call to action. Thank you.
Thank you, Arti. Alessandro?
My point is related to what I actually touched, the need to better investigate what NTN can bring in terms of energy. Let me say, use this word, energy saving and reducing the environmental impact of the entire 6G. And that actually needs to go in the direction of understanding that this component is actually a fundamental one and can bring much more than it can take in its integration with 6G. We need to study that point.
Thank you, Alessandro. Fabio, do you want to follow?
Yes, I would say that as call to action is to include in the scientific research also the aspects related to the ethic, responsibility, and related to social inclusion, social equality, that sometimes are a bit, let's say, neglected, trying to privilege some, let's say, more technical aspects. I think that the two parts of the research are strictly linked, and we should try to bring them together in order to make especially institutions, but also companies, more aware about the broader impact of the innovation that we introduce.
Sorry, I was mute. Thank you, Fabio. Jim?
Thanks. So I think overall we're at a very early stage of analyzing, understanding, and controlling climate and sustainability impacts. Really quite early stage, and I think that many of the approaches thus far in terms of targets for industries and trying to manage things at a macro level are probably a bit crude to achieve the results that we need. And potentially can drive counterproductive behaviors. So behaviors at the margin to meet targets which are actually counterproductive in the isolated case in which that behavior exists. So I think that what we need to do is we need to get to a more holistic solution which looks at impacts end to end. Look at micro level solutions, harness microeconomics rather than macroeconomics, and figure out how to put that information in front of people so that you get a behavioral shift that is consistent with the goals we're trying to achieve, rather than regulating big chunks of industry.
Thank you very much. Thank you for your forward-looking perspective. Now I would like to give the floor to Giovanni, which will focus on the Towards Zero Pollution Working Group at Digital for Planet. Thank you all. Thank you to all the speakers. I hope you will stay with us until the end.
Thank you very much, Monique. And thanks also to all the speakers on my side, because I have the, let's say, comfortable position to speak last. So yes, sometimes ladies first or whoever first it can be a disadvantage. Because I mean, it's with pleasure that I see that most of the topics that we want to cover in our working group and I will present here have been already well highlighted, and we can gather already some interesting insight on all of those. So at the beginning, I start my presentation just by reminding what also Monique has mentioned, that which is this fact that ICT has great potential, transform the world like in ways that we wouldn't have imagined, and there are countless options and use cases that you can make to argue for the fact that more technology will certainly improve things, because it's all about doing things better, right? Make a world a better place and so on. On the other hand, we also know, and that's the other general point that is not even pertinent only to this topic or to this webinar, but to the existence of Digital for Planet as a whole. So the name of the association, Digital for Planet, it comes exactly from the recognition that digital can help, but can also work against these objectives. And this is what Monique introduced, but we also have heard in various declinations from the other speakers. So we can misuse technology, or we can use it properly from an efficiency point of view, but still have end results that are counterproductive, unless exactly as at the end Jim mentioned, let's say, magic words that always occurs in our webinars, that is the holistic or also complexity mindset. So all these ideas that these are not problems that you can slice and dice and then solve a little cube and then multiply the little cube by a million millions and then you get the big solution. It doesn't work like this, it's non-linear, and we know that, but sometimes we don't follow through this let's say, intellectual recognition, and this is the risk. So Digital for Planet, beyond the general activities that Monique mentioned, we organized a few working groups and we organized already webinars, and you can also go on our website and have a look at the recordings of the webinars, and please do not hesitate to contact us on all these topics, because we are looking actively for members of the association and also contributors to the working groups. So when we're talking about zero pollution networks, we started in defining this working group by the acknowledgement that the evolution of telecommunications improved by order of magnitude the performance of the network according to many metrics. One obvious candidate of this metric that, as I said, I'm lucky to just have to repeat what it was already highlighted, that the energy efficiency is one of the most important metrics that are very important for climate impact assessment, but also one of the ones that have been constantly improving by large amount and for various reasons. However, and this is another point that I think slots in well with the consideration of holistic, of there is no single solution, and it's important to be able to integrate the various networks and so on. It is that, let's say, by nature, technology competitors, they tend to assess against each other using, I don't know, derivative or fractional or ratio kind of metrics, right? So I'm better, my network is better than yours because I can consume less energy per bit, or I can have a lower carbon footprint per user served or per channel managed and so on. This is all good and well, but we know that at the end of the day, in a holistic or let's say system thinking mindset, what matters is only the aggregated impact. So if we violate a planetary boundary because we have 3 really, really bad carbon stoves, or if we violate it because we have a billion of super efficient IoT devices, it doesn't really matter at the end. So at the end, that's what, in a certain sense, mankind will be assessed against. There are planetary boundaries that we are trying to assess and see how much can we afford, what can we get away with, how much carbon dioxide we can still generate, how much biodiversity reduction we can still cause, and so on. So all these big planetary boundaries, they will be violated or not as a global effect of the existence of humans on the planet. And so when we start to then go into the sectors like, okay, what does this mean for the telecommunication network, we have all these issues of direct, indirect impact, the trade-off that maybe, yes, high resolution video for video conference is bad because consumes more energy, but if the alternative is to go and fly to a place, then it's actually better to have the video conference and so on. So we need end-to-end life cycle impact analysis, and not just be proud that we are faster or lower power, or we have passive reflecting surfaces to do wireless short-range communication without energy consumption. This is all good, but it's the whole story that matters. And this also has been mentioned particularly in good technical detail by Alessandro, where we really have seen that there are unfortunately, there's lack of study, but there is the recognition that such studies are fundamental. Otherwise, we are flying a little bit blind from the point of view of the steering evolution of next generation networks with an eye to sustainability. And this is recognized even in some 6G positioning papers that try to put the whole thing in context of the Sustainable Development Goals and so on. So this, let's say, from a relatively outsider position, these are the main considerations that made Digital for Planet think that this working group is not only relevant, but also can help contribute to the solution. So if I have to define the goals and the activities of the working group, the idea here is really to explore and make connection with the various activities that are dealing with network evolution in a sustainable way, and even pollution elimination as far as possible. If you compare this with the mission statement of other working groups that we defined in the previous webinars, in this case, at the moment, because this depends also on the evolution of the membership, we are seeing this working group less as a, let's say, incubator for future standards. So it's not really at the moment positioned in a very technical network architecture or network technology point of view, but it is tries to be more a forum to have discussions that cross the boundaries, let's say, of engineering domains, okay, of specialized, because they're already, I mean, extremely well established and effective organizations that are already covering this technological dialogue that we want to be part of and participate, but we are not interested in becoming a pre-standard forum at the moment. Having said that, in the honoring the general Digital for Planet positioning, we want to be there for roadmap and research and innovation activities and roadmaps, and also to help players that can have less obvious access to the large consortia or the large research programs in Europe, such as small and medium enterprises. So we want to be there as an aggregation point where they can also make their voice heard in a more effective way. Then, of course, like this webinar proves, we want to engage people that are experts or otherwise stakeholders and the public to keep on the discussion and the awareness on these topics that are very important in the perspective of the ongoing activities in Europe especially, but globally, because these are then global problems at the end of the day, but particularly since we are located here in Europe, the Green Deal and the other relevant European level initiatives. At the moment, we can define three main goals for the working group. One is to examine, as I was saying before, is more like discussion and not yet direct technical innovation intervention. All these, let's say, boundary issues like general requirements, use cases, and concepts that can help the evolution of next generation communication network to be more sustainability driven. Then on this, let's say, taking this from the SDGs point of view. So we have the sustainability objectives and we want to see what are the requirements that drive. On the other hand, again, without necessarily being core technological providers of innovation, we want to consider the trends that are emerging from technology. So there are new techniques, new ideas that maybe have obvious advantages, but we are not yet sure what can we do with them. And this is also the other side of the conversation that we want to have. Last but definitely not least, with a special nod to Fabio's presentation, then we want to include not only the sustainability concept, but the whole idea of this ethical, legal, and socio-economical, so the so-called else layer in the discussion of the evolution of future communication network, also with, let's say, an eye to the other working groups, because we have a next generation internet working group where, guess what, the ethical and the socio-economical aspect has been acknowledged. And we have also cloud and edge IoT continuum, where also in that case there is, for example, the issue of data ownership and the social equality of access to devices and so on. So we definitely also want to include these aspects, because Fabio mentioned before the ethical, the trustworthy AI program of the European Commission. And while I am a strong supporter of that, it is also true that AI got the ethical program because of Frankenstein and the Terminator. I mean, there are mythological reasons why AI is scary. And so it was easier for the community, for the public to realize that, hey, we cannot use this scary thing without any ethical check. But of course, this is true also for the less scary satellites or a next generation network or many other technologies. So this is definitely a general point. It is also recognized by the European Commission in the new programs. So these were the goals. Areas of intervention, we would like to certainly liaise and analyze and discuss with existing research and innovation initiatives, but also participate to some. So there is certainly an angle for this working group to be a networking opportunity and a possible consortia incubator and exchange platform, so to speak, for different parties that are interested in these topics. In particular, I could say that in the Horizon Europe program, there is this strong emphasis on the multi-actor approach, which is one of the ways how the Commission recognized that all these serious problems, they require more than one kind of expertise. So there is a particular push for really different domain expertise to come together. And this is one of the things that we believe a working group like this one can be a good place for. And then, of course, we would be very interested in learning and also advertising and supporting all the environmental footprint assessment for the communication network, which is a very tricky work, as many speakers already pointed out. Of course, European innovation, next generation network, one cannot ignore the smart network and services partnership and the general path towards 6G. And this is obviously one major point of contact for us to engage with. But also specific projects that are just a brilliant research idea. They don't have the sponsorship or the consensus of a large intergovernmental initiative, but they have a specific idea and they are going deep in that. These are also people that we really want to hear from. And last but not least, this is the analogous of the else. So how in the last webinar, one person from the public asked me, yeah, but how do you ensure the else coverage? And then I said, well, to ensure the else coverage, you have to engage the people that are experienced in ethics and legal and socio-economical aspects. It's like diversity. The panel of diversity is made by all people of the same gender, class, and ethnicity. Yeah, maybe it works, but it's more likely that if you have a diverse mix of people, they will propose something that is better in diversity. Likewise here, cannot be only technology, but we have to engage also people that have this else, let's say, state of mind and expertise. And with this, I close. Thank you. And these are our contact information. Please ask questions now, but also don't miss our social media channels, website, where you can see all the webinars and the slides in the past, and I guess part at least of these as well. And you can contact us directly. Thank you.
So thank you very much, Giovanni. I just wanted to do a little wrap up. It was a dense and intense webinar, a couple of hours spent with great experts. Let me add my screen now. I will try to add my last slide. So as I said, dense, there's never enough time to discuss all the interesting aspects. When it comes to the point it's interesting, it's almost always about time to finish. But as Giovanni stressed, and as we all know, the idea with Digital for Planet is to make sure that the dialogue keeps on going. Actually, it's not a dialogue, it's a multi-stakeholders conversation that we aim to animate and engage several players, from big organizations to small, medium player, individuals and associations. In doing that, of course, we believe that we should join forces. And the reason why we should is that individually, many of these aspects cannot be tackled appropriately, either because there's a limited amount of knowledge or resources, or even very strong time pressure. What we are experiencing, as I told you at the beginning, an association that aims to be very pragmatic in its approach to the next challenges we need to face for greening digital technologies and for ensuring that technologies are greener by design, is actually to gather together experts from different communities. It's clear that ICT players only cannot achieve that. We need to work with, all representatives from various industry, from public services, with regulators, with policymakers, because of course, it's a very complex and articulated challenge. But clearly, what we want together is to change from our everyday life and way of doing business our digital footprint. We want to reduce the CO2 footprint of our digital behavior. And we want to be part of a growing community. So if among the you that attended are aware of relevant studies, relevant activities, projects, initiatives, and of course, if you want to join to create synergies with other organizations involved in this big mission, I would say, please contact us. So I also wanted to finish with the word, let's keep our minds healthy with healthy bodies, and by the way, healthy environment. Today is the World Bicycle Day. And I hope that out of these couple of hours together, you take away a few but important, precious, learnings, and you will help us spreading the word even beyond these couple of hours. We will have the recorded version of the webinar published online. We will have the slides, and we will make sure that all the people that are registered to our newsletter will receive updates also about upcoming calls that we might be partner of, or that might be relevant to our community. So please keep being engaged, and I wish you all a good rest of the afternoon. Thank you very much.